$50 million company in secret and bought theirs. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you, subscribe, because this isn't just a story. It's a reminder that quiet ambition can shake entire empires. I adjusted the sleeves of my charcoal gray blouse in the mirror of my downtown Seattle loft, choosing something intentionally dull, something that wouldn't raise any questions. The basic Chromebook I kept just for family visits sat closed on my kitchen table, showing only a handful of simple sketches, just enough to maintain the illusion. The invitation to the Layton family gathering rested nearby, its silver lettering practically glowing under the pendant lights. Join us to honor the legacy of Layton Financial and celebrate the achievements of the next generation. My eyes lingered on the words. I'd never been part of the achievements column. The event, as always, was hosted at my brother Miles' estate overlooking Lake Washington. It promised catered elegance, power networking, and as usual, subtle reminders that I'd fallen short of the Layton standard. My phone buzzed, a message from my COO. Signature received, we officially own Graphenix Media. Layton Financial had just sold one of their struggling media ventures to my company. They didn't know it was mine. 10 years of careful misdirection was finally about to deliver the poetic justice I never dared to dream of. The drive through winding neighborhoods gave me time to reflect. I'd grown up in the Layton world, where prestige and pedigree were practically genetic. My father, Howard Layton, built a financial empire. My brother Miles was the next golden heir, Ivy League to the core. And then there was me, Elena, the odd one, the daughter who sketched storyboards instead of studying investment strategies. Art won't feed you, Elena, my father once barked. It's indulgence, not a livelihood. I still remember announcing I'd declined my acceptance to Yale to attend a digital arts college in Vancouver. My mother clutched her pearls like I'd told her I was joining the circus. What they never knew was that while I studied visual storytelling, I also quietly earned a certification in entrepreneurship. Nights were spent learning financial modeling. My first animated microseries went viral on a niche startup forum. The prize? 10 grand and a contract to produce a product explainer series. That was the seed. I funneled every cent back into hiring freelancers, building a team, and pitching corporate clients on branded storytelling. Turns out, the business world craved authenticity. Something animation delivered better than any PowerPoint. Now, at 34, I lead Ember House Studios. We power campaigns for half the Fortune 500. And today, Layton Financial becomes our newest client. Without even knowing it. We incorporated as Ember House Studios, and I made sure to use my middle name, Elena Phoenix, on every document. Elena Phoenix, not Elena Layton, became the creative force behind what would become one of the most sought-after digital storytelling agencies in North America. Of course, my family never knew. To them, I was still just Elena, the bohemian dreamer who occasionally sold an illustration online or picked up a freelance gig from a local boutique. Whenever they asked about my career, I gave them just enough to keep their low expectations intact. The Lakewood estate came into view, Miles's pride and joy. Acres of manicured lawn, towering hedges trimmed with machine precision, and a fleet of imported cars gleaming in the circular driveway. My modest Mazda 3 looked like a delivery vehicle parked among Bentleys and Aston Martins. I parked near the gate, took a breath, and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Neutral lipstick, no eyeliner, hair in a simple braid. My blazer was off-brand, my shoes scuffed just enough. Everything about my look had been carefully assembled to say, still trying, still failing. "Elena!" My mother's voice rang out as I walked up the stone path. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd get here before dessert." She greeted me with her usual air kiss, her eyes immediately dropping to assess my outfit. I saw the quick flicker of relief. It was appropriately underwhelming. "Traffic," I said lightly, "and I had to finish a commission." "Oh?" Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Someone actually paid for your illustrations?" The pause before illustrations was subtle, but pointed. If only she knew that just yesterday I'd finalized a $50 million contract with a global tech firm to build immersive onboarding content using AI-generated animation. Instead, I just smiled. Yeah, just a small e-commerce brand, nothing major. The interior of the house hadn't changed. Same gold accents, same sterile modern art, same oversized portraits of Miles and his accolades. Photos lined the hallway. Miles at Stanford. Miles receiving an award from the Chamber of Commerce. Miles cutting the ribbon at the latest Leighton Financial HQ. There was one photo of me tucked in a hallway corner. Me at 17, in a paint-splattered hoodie, grinning beside a county art fair ribbon. The great room was buzzing. Conversations swirled about crypto valuations, IPO pipelines, and political connections. Near the fireplace, Cousin Blake was boasting about his VC fund's latest bet. Aunt Linda was showcasing her daughter's luxury skincare brand. And in the middle of it all stood Miles, sharp as ever in a Brioni suit. "Elena," he called, lifting his wine glass with that familiar smug tone. "Still chasing your little cartoons? If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you, hit that subscribe button, because in the next part, Elena's quiet revenge finally comes to light, and it's nothing short of legendary. I'm so glad you could take time away from your art to join us." Miles offered a brief embrace, barely touching me, careful not to wrinkle his custom-tailored suit. "You look," he paused, eyes scanning my understated outfit. "Comfortable." "Thanks," I replied, tugging gently at the hem of my off-the-rack Target dress, playing the role he expected. "Your suit is sharp." "Brioni," he said, smoothing the fabric. "A little something to celebrate our latest win. Leighton Financial just acquired our biggest competitor in the fintech space." I nodded, biting back a smirk. If only he knew that by tomorrow, his company would be under mine. Leighton Financial was hours away from being officially absorbed by Ember House Studios through our newly acquired media tech firm. "That's amazing," I said lightly. "Sounds like things are really taking off." "Better than ever," Miles beamed with pride. "Actually, I was just sharing our next expansion strategy. We're moving into digital content, animations, VR training tools, interactive campaigns. Corporate storytelling is the next frontier." My heart skipped. There it was, the reason I'd moved so aggressively on acquiring their media arm. They had no idea they were marching straight into my arena. "Animation?" I asked innocently. "Sounds complicated." Miles chuckled, his voice just a little too loud. "Oh, Elena, it's just business. We won't be doing the actual design work. That's what freelancers are for. People like—" He waved vaguely in my direction. Relatives had started to gather around, drawn by his laughter and the scent of superiority. "Still doodling cartoons, Elena?" My cousin Blake chimed in with a smirk. "I've got a couple interns at my firm who moonlight as artists. Want me to send you their portfolio?" "Thanks," I murmured. "But I'm doing all right with my projects." "All right?" Miles arched an eyebrow. "Is that why you're still driving that little beater?" They didn't know I owned 3 cars, including a fully electric Porsche Taycan. And that the so-called tiny apartment I lived in, I owned the whole building. "I get by," I said with a shrug. "Not everyone needs marble countertops to feel successful." "Getting by isn't succeeding," came a familiar voice behind me. I turned. My father stood with his usual stern expression, arms folded. "Miles's latest deal is worth more than you'll ever make sketching fairy tales," he said flatly. The fire rose in my chest, but I smiled. In less than 24 hours, the fairy tale they mocked would own the empire they worshipped. By this time tomorrow, Elena Phoenix would be revealed as the CEO of Ember House Studios and the new owner of Leighton Financial's digital subsidiary. But tonight, I simply smiled and excused myself to get a drink. Let them enjoy their illusion of superiority a little longer. Let them believe I was still the floundering artist, barely making rent. After all, revenge is an art form too. The family gathering stretched into the evening, every hour bringing fresh opportunities for my relatives to offer backhanded compliments or outright reminders of my potential that never amounted to much. Meanwhile, I checked my phone like clockwork. Messages rolled in from my executive team. Press release cleared by legal. Features secured with Forbes for the 10 a.m. embargo. Board transition documents signed. It was all happening. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the golden light slip behind the manicured hedges of Miles' waterfront estate. That's when my father approached, swirling a glass of his favorite 18-year Highland Scotch, the same brand I kept stocked in my corner office in downtown Seattle. "Elena," he began, voice steeped in that signature disappointment. "Your mother and I have been talking." I braced myself. These conversations were never soft landings. "Your brother's new digital division will need creatives," he continued. "Entry-level stuff. Animations, illustrations, nothing too artistic, but stable, good benefits, a real salary." He emphasized real, like it was a jab. "She's willing to give you a chance," he added, "despite your lack of business experience." I sipped my champagne to hide my smile. If he only knew, Ember House's annual revenue nearly tripled what Leighton's entire media strategy had earned to date. "Thanks, Dad," I said, "but I'm doing fine with my freelance work." He sighed audibly. "Elena, you're 34. Don't you think it's time to stop pretending art is a career?" His gaze drifted to my simple dress, the shoes I'd scuffed on purpose, the facade I'd kept so carefully curated. "You could have gone to Yale. You could have led the next generation of Leightons." Instead, I'd chosen pixels and passion, and built an empire they couldn't even see. I opened my mouth to speak, ready to finally pull the curtain back, when my phone buzzed. "BOO, all board members confirmed for tomorrow's 9 a.m. meeting. We're greenlit." I closed my mouth. "Not yet." 12 more hours. Then the art show begins. "Actually, what?" my father pressed, his brow raised in that familiar, disappointed way. "Nothing," I said softly. "You're right. I made my choices." He shook his head and walked away, leaving me standing by the window as the final rays of sunlight faded behind the Douglas firs lining the lake. Across the room, I heard Miles's laugh rise again, sharp, performative. "Lena's always marched to the beat of her own drum," he was saying to Aunt Linda. "Some people just aren't built for real success. But hey, at least she's finally humble enough to accept help." I glanced at my watch. 7:30 p.m. 14 hours. That's all that stood between this moment and the shift that would change everything. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite condescension and patronizing offers. Blake, always smug, offered to teach me basic accounting. Aunt Linda suggested her daughter could help me set up a real portfolio site. Even my mother pulled me aside to show me job listings for junior graphic designers. Through it all I nodded, smiled, and played my part, the quiet, harmless underachiever in their overachieving world. But beneath the surface, I was ticking off the minutes. As the party wound down, Miles found me near the coat check. "I hope you'll give Dad's offer some real thought," he said, his voice syrupy with false kindness. "We'll start you at entry level, just simple design work for internal decks and training guides, nothing overwhelming." I thought of my corner office overlooking Seattle's skyline, of the 200-plus employees at Ember House, of the projects we were developing with tech giants and Hollywood studios. "I'll think about it," I said smoothly. "Don't take too long," he warned. "Once we go public with our digital expansion next week, we'll be flooded with applications. I'm only offering this because you're family." He handed me my coat. "Oh," he added, eyeing my outfit, "and if you do come on board, we'll need to update your wardrobe. That dress is a bit casual. You'll want to look more professional." I looked down at my carefully chosen outfit. Modest, outdated, deliberately unremarkable. I thought of the walk-in closet at home filled with Prada, Dior, and Alexander McQueen. "I'll keep that in mind," I replied. As I drove back toward the city, the weight of the last 10 years hit me. 10 years of playing small, of letting them believe I'd failed. And now, finally, the moment I'd waited for was nearly here. The reveal, the reckoning, the masterpiece. Back in my Seattle penthouse, I slipped out of my struggling artist costume and into a pair of silk pajamas, luxuriously soft and worth more than Miles' entire wardrobe, including that smug Brioni suit. I opened my real laptop, the one I used to run an empire, not the decoy I brought to family events. On screen, the final acquisition documents for Leighton Financial's digital division glowed in soft light. A message pinged from Kara, my executive assistant. "Everything's confirmed for tomorrow. Car arrives at 8:30 a.m. sharp." The Leighton board still doesn't know you'll be at the meeting. I poured myself 2 fingers of the same aged scotch my father had been sipping earlier, the irony too rich to ignore, and stepped onto my terrace. Below, the city shimmered with electric confidence. Somewhere across the lake, Miles was probably still basking in self-importance, telling his wife about how he was giving his poor, wayward sister a chance at a real career. My private phone rang, the line only my core team had access to. It was Marcus, my COO and oldest business partner. "Elena," he said, voice steady, "just confirming you're in for tomorrow. Once we go public, it all changes." "My family?" I asked softly. "They'll finally know the truth," he said. "All of it," I finished. There was a pause. "You sure you want to do it this way? We could send a proxy. Keep your identity hidden a little longer." I stared out over the glittering skyline, thought about the decades of quiet dismissal, the offers of help, the pitying looks. "No," I said. "I want to see their faces when they realize exactly who they tried to pity." After hanging up, I lingered on the terrace, the wind cool against my skin. Every insult, every eye roll, every time I'd been underestimated, it had brought me here. Tomorrow, they'd see that the daughter they dismissed as impractical had quietly outbuilt them all, that success didn't have to wear a suit or speak in buzzwords. Tomorrow, Elena Leighton would disappear, and Elena Phoenix, CEO of Ember House Studios, would rise. I raised my glass to the skyline. The performance was over. The reveal was about to begin. The Leighton boardroom looked just like I remembered, mahogany, leather, and arrogance. I stood in the private elevator, now wearing a custom camel suit that cost more than 6 months of the entry-level salary Miles had so generously offered. "Ready, Miss Phoenix?" Marcus asked beside me. We had started together, from nothing. I checked my reflection in the mirrored elevator walls. "Let's make history," I said. Gone was the carefully constructed mask of the starving artist. Today, I looked every inch the CEO I truly was. Elena Phoenix in a tailored camel suit, heels clicking with purpose. "Ready?" I said to Marcus, just as the elevator doors opened onto the top executive floor of Leighton Financial. Inside the boardroom, Miles was holding court, gesturing enthusiastically as he spoke to the gathered board members. My father sat tall at the head of the table, polished and powerful in his signature navy suit. Neither noticed me at first, too wrapped up in a future they were certain belonged to them. "The Ember House team should be here any minute," Miles was saying, brimming with confidence. "Once we finalize this partnership, Leighton Financial will lead the digital content space in under a year." "Actually," I said, stepping fully into the room, "there's been a slight change of plans." The room froze. Miles stopped mid-sentence, his mouth parted slightly, caught off guard. My father slowly stood, a frown forming. "Elena? What are you doing here? This is a private board meeting." I smiled, calm and composed, and placed my briefcase on the table. "I know exactly what this meeting is. In fact, I'm the one who called it." "This is absurd," Miles snapped, snapping out of his shock. "Security? That won't be necessary," Marcus said, stepping in smoothly. "Miss Phoenix has every right to be here." "Phoenix?" Miles blinked. My first thought was that her name was Leighton. My second was that her name was Leighton. My third, "Professionally," I said, flipping open my briefcase, "I go by Elena Phoenix, the name I used to build Ember House Studios from the ground up." I began handing out packets, acquisition documents, final sale agreements, press materials ready for release. The color drained from my father's face as he read the heading. "Official transfer of Leighton digital assets to Ember House Studios." This can't be right." "Oh, it's very right," I said, moving to the far end of the table and taking my seat. My rightful seat. "Let me tell you a story," I said, "about a girl who loved art and business equally, who studied marketing at night while building animation by day, who saw what no one else did, a gap in the corporate storytelling space, and built a company worth over $100 million. Miles was pale as he flipped through the pages. His hands were trembling. "You're Elena Phoenix? You own Ember House?" I nodded. The company you've been desperate to partner with has been mine for a decade. Since around the time you all decided I'd thrown my life away. But you live in a tiny apartment, Miles stammered. You drive a Mazda. I chuckled. I own the entire building that apartment sits in, and that Mazda? Just my costume for family visits. I paused, meeting his stunned eyes. Would you have taken me seriously if I'd shown up in the Porsche Taycan? Would you have preferred I showed up in my Porsche? I asked, lifting an eyebrow. One more thing to assume I couldn't possibly afford? My father was still staring down at the documents, specifically the page showing Ember House Studios' current market valuation. All this time, he murmured. All this time? I echoed, my voice calm but resolute. Every holiday, every birthday dinner, every backhanded compliment about following my passion, every comparison to Miles's real success. While you were underestimating me, I was building something bigger than Leighton Financial ever dared to be. Why? Miles demanded, his voice rising. Why hide it? Why let us believe you'd failed? Because you never would have respected it, I said sharply. You would have tried to absorb it, rebrand it, fold it into your empire, strip it of its soul and call it progress. I needed space to build it on my terms. I stood, adjusting my blazer with quiet authority. And now, as of 9 a.m. this morning, Ember House Studios is the legal owner of Leighton Digital. We'll be restructuring immediately, prioritizing innovation, not inheritance. I turned toward my brother. Miles, your position as CEO will be dissolved. You're welcome to apply for a role in our creative development team. I looked to my father. You'll be moved to an advisory capacity until your retirement next month. The silence that followed was complete. Even the board members, who normally clung to every word my father spoke, sat frozen in disbelief. You can't do this, Miles finally stammered. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, I already have. The board approved the sale last week. They just didn't know I was the buyer. My phone buzzed right on cue. I turned the screen toward the table. The New York Times, live. The artist behind the empire, Elena Phoenix, reveals herself as CEO of Ember House Studios in shocking acquisition of Leighton Financial's digital arm. Oh, and about that entry-level position you offered me yesterday, I added, turning to Miles. I'll have to pass. I'm afraid I'm a bit overqualified. The next hour blurred by in signatures and stunned expressions. My father sat in silence, staring at the long, polished table, now under my command. As the boardroom emptied, leaving only us, Miles finally spoke, voice hollow. All these years, he said, you let us think you were failing. You let us pity you. No, I corrected, meeting his eyes. You chose to pity me. You saw what you wanted to see, the disappointment, the failure. You never once imagined I could be more. My father rose slowly from his chair, looking older, smaller than I had ever seen him. Ella, save it, I said gently. I didn't do this for revenge. I met his gaze. I did it because it was the right business decision. Ember House needs Leighton's infrastructure to scale, and Leighton Financial? It needs our innovation if it wants to survive the next decade. I gathered my folder, clicking it shut. There's a dinner tonight at Canlis to formally announce the merger. I trust you'll both attend. They nodded wordlessly, still reeling. Good. I stepped toward the door. Oh, and Miles? I paused, letting the moment settle. Next time you talk about dressing professionally, maybe think about who's sitting at the head of the table. The elevator doors slid shut behind me. The ride back to the Phoenix building, my company's glass-clad headquarters overlooking Elliott Bay, was quiet. Marcus didn't speak. He knew I needed space to process. It wasn't until we returned to my penthouse-level office that he asked, "Feel good?" I stepped to the window, watching sunlight glance off the water, the Space Needle in the distance. It feels right, I said softly, like finishing a canvas I started a decade ago. My phone buzzed again. And again. A flood of messages. Cousin Blake, who once offered to help me network, now wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss his VC fund. Aunt Linda had emailed asking if her daughter could apply for a design internship. Even my mother had texted, "Why didn't you tell us?" I left them unread. They could talk to me tonight, when I was no longer the family failure, but their equal, or maybe more. Instead, I opened my laptop and began writing a speech. Tomorrow, I'd address Leighton Digital's employees. I wanted them to know that while change was coming, their futures were safe, if they were willing to embrace creativity, not just legacy. Then, another message came in. From Miles. "I need to understand, please, can we talk before dinner?" I thought about it for a moment, then typed my reply. "Come by my office, the real one, Phoenix Building, 35th floor. Security will be expecting you." An hour later, Miles stood in my office, stiff, uncomfortable. His eyes wandered across the room, the wall of original artwork, the clean architectural lines, the commanding view of Seattle's skyline. All the signs of a life he never imagined I'd built. "Why?" he asked. "Why what?" I replied. "Why did you hide this? Why did you buy Leighton? Why let us all believe you'd failed?" "All of it." I gestured for Miles to take a seat. "Because you and Dad never would have accepted my success on my terms," I said. "You would have reshaped it, repackaged it, forced it into your definition of achievement, board meetings, profit margins, a rigid corporate mold." I shook my head. But Ember House thrived because it wasn't traditional. We innovate, we tell stories, we lead with vision, not just spreadsheets. "But we're family," he said, a little too defensively. "We could have helped." "Like you helped yesterday," I raised an eyebrow, "by offering me an entry-level design job out of pity? That's not help, Miles. That's control." He had the decency to look embarrassed. "I never knew," he admitted quietly. "I never even suspected." "Because you never looked," I said simply. "None of you did. You saw what you expected. The flaky sister who traded stocks for sketches. You never stopped to think that maybe art and ambition aren't mutually exclusive." He turned toward the window, the skyline reflected in the glass. "What happens now?" "Now," I exhaled. "Now we move forward. Leighton Digital becomes part of Ember House. We create something new. If you're willing to learn, to adapt, there may be a place for you. But not as CEO, not anymore." He nodded, the reality finally sinking in. "You're not just my little sister anymore, are you?" I gave a small smile. "I never was. You just never saw who I really was." That evening, standing before our extended family at Canlis, I raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I said, "and to the art of success." Later, back in my penthouse, I opened an old sketchbook, the same one I'd carried through college. On the last page, in fading ink, was the quote that had carried me through. "The greatest art lies in hiding your mastery until the perfect moment of revelation." I smiled and closed the book. My masterpiece was complete. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking with me through the silence, the struggle, and the triumph. My name is Elena Phoenix, and for 10 years I was the family failure, the dreamer, the artist who never quite fit. I watched from the sidelines as my family built legacies, while I quietly built mine in the shadows. But today, I stand in the light, not to gloat, but to remind you, you don't have to prove your worth on anyone else's terms. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been told your dreams were too small, too impractical, too different, I want to hear from you. Leave me a comment below. Talk to me, not just the character. What would you say to someone who's just now beginning their own silent climb?